I'm very excited to introduce you to today's guest. It's actually my first time meeting him not in person, but online. I did hear him speak once in Beverly Hills, and he's always been on my radar to interview. His name, he goes by Rabbi Shmuly, and he is really making a big difference in the world, and he's going to come on now and tell you how he's doing that. So welcome to the show, Rabbi Shmuly. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Chef AJ. I love the great work you're doing. It's an honor to be with you.
Well, thank you. So just in case some of my viewers aren't familiar with you and your work and your organization, tell us a little bit about how you have merged veganism and Judaism and why you became vegan in the first place.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So my wife and I actually became vegan together on our wedding day. We were always a little intimidated. We had thought about it and wanted it, but we didn't know that we could do it alone. And we decided to take that dive on our wedding day, saying it was a 1-year commitment, not knowing if it would last. And thankfully it lasted. And we've raised all of our kids and our foster kids in the vegan world. And then shortly after that, we said, wait a minute. Well, we gotta make this Jewish world more vegan, and so we launched Shamayim, which means heaven, with the idea that the utopia we call heaven, so sort of this next worldly sphere, should be brought into this world. And that world looks like one of love and justice and compassion. And so that takes a whole bunch of different approaches, which I can talk more about later if there's interest, around how we make the Jewish community a vehicle towards a global vegan situation.
I would love to hear more about that, Rabbi, because I was actually raised Orthodox Jewish, and I always questioned everything, as I still do today. And I know we were kosher, so we didn't eat every type of animal, and even the animals we ate, we didn't eat every part of that animal. And I remember going to the rabbi as a little kid saying, well, I don't get this. Why do we eat animals at all? Because to me, even though an animal is slaughtered in a kosher way, it just doesn't still make sense to me.
Yes, you're totally right. And I operate in 2 Jewish spheres. One is the pluralistic sphere, which says I work with the whole community. But the other is, as an Orthodox rabbi, I mean, I really, I guess progressive Orthodox, but still Orthodox. I'm very much a part of those traditional systems. And I think you're right. There are a lot of misunderstandings as to what is required and what the ethos ought to be in regards to meat. And we can kind of unpack some of those if there's interest. I've been very involved in kind of the kosher system world and understanding how there could be improvements and changes and some of the myths that exist over there as well.
Yeah. Well, please do that, because I have a lot of questions were sent in about Jewish eating. Like, for example, why is it so hard to convince Jewish people to give up meat and dairy, for example?
Yes, exactly. So, well, one of the things that happens with a history of persecution, with crusades and pogroms and being second-class citizens at best, not to mention the Holocaust, is a marginalized people wants to become very tight-knit and not change, not evolve in its ways. And so you hold on to things as you are constantly displaced as refugees. And one of the things that was held on to was food, a deep relationship to food. Now let's bracket the Sephardic world from North Africa and the Mediterranean region, and talk about the Ashkenazi world, which was obviously deeply affected by the Holocaust. If there were 18 million Jews and we lost 6 down to 12 at the time, you lost a third of the people. And so the cuisine was something very attached to, whether it was the cholent or the brisket or these things that their bubby made back in the shtetl, that their grandmother made back in the villages, that they wanted to feel like they were still there. And so I get that. I have an emotional attachment to that. And yet it's not authentic religion. It's more of a nostalgia to a culture. And we always know ethics is more important than cultural nostalgia. And so we can make recipes that taste just like that kind of thing and hold on to that nostalgia while evolving. So that's the first thing I'll say, is I have a sympathy for the nostalgia that emerges from that trauma. And yet at the same time, we can hold on to that and evolve beyond it as well. So that's the first thing I'll say. I think the second thing around this food issue is that the law, again, to try to prevent assimilation, was geared towards non-changing. We should just keep doing things the way we always did it, so we don't lose our heritage. And yet, that's also not authentic. The authentic approach was always hold on to things and evolve at the same time. How do we be rooted, to take a tree analogy, be rooted in the earth and yet also, have new leaves that continue to grow. And so Judaism is a great model for that. In fact, the Dalai Lama famously wanted to meet with a group of Jews a few decades ago to say, how do you survive in a diaspora? What's the wisdom? Because Jews are kind of the model of survival, through lots of challenges. And so on the meat question in specific, I'd love to embrace some of those questions.
Absolutely. Well, you have me thinking about so many things, because I think about one of my favorite movies, Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye where things keep changing, tradition. Like first, the oldest daughter has the audacity to want to marry somebody that wasn't chosen, but asks permission. And then the second daughter, she basically just says, hey, I'm marrying this guy, but he's Jewish. And the third one, marries somebody who isn't. And he says, if you bend too far, you're going to break. And that's, sometimes I feel like, people tell me, because I eat what they think of as a restrictive vegan diet, because I don't eat salt, oil, or sugar, that I'm making it too hard for people to be vegan. And sometimes I hear that Orthodox Judaism makes it too hard for people to be Jewish.
Right.
So you're like the SOS free version of Judaism.
Well, it's like they say, how many rabbis does it take to change a light bulb? Change? It's like the change itself can be impossible. And yet there's something beautiful about that. Nobody's going to shake me for my veganism. I'm not going to change from that. When we believe in something so deeply, we don't want to change. And yet we also know we have to evolve. And so there's a few things to unpack there about how deeply rooted this is. Because actually, if you look at the Garden of Eden, the story of Gan Eden, what actually happens over there is the birth of moral consciousness emerges from the first act of food consumption. That is to say that the moral center, the moral essence of the human experience is related to what we eat. And that is such a deeply Jewish message. And the truth is, in previous eras, there was a different standard. Today, we know more than we do ever than before about the greatest suffering on the planet, quantitatively and qualitatively, is in the animal kingdom. Hands down. The tens of billions of land animals killed, not to mention the fish that occur. If one cares about ethics, this has to be extremely central. And that emerges right there in the Garden of Eden. The very first commandment, the very first ethical mistake that happens is related to food consumption and the birth of moral consciousness. And so whether one is a Jew, another faith, they have no faith, they're not a part of, central to our ethics and whatever community we're a part of has to be these food choices. And thankfully, it is easier than ever before. This is not only about animal suffering. This is not only about climate change. This is not only about human health, all of those being important. This is also about our conscience, about living a life of an expansive soul. Regardless of what religion we are, Judaism makes this clear, no religion. I believe we have a soul. We have an essence within us, a spiritual light, and that light is nourished through compassionate living.
Right. Well, it's, kosher excludes some animals. So it's very nice. Like I love that I never had to eat a pig, in my life. And so that was wonderful. Or I never had to eat, shellfish or crab or shrimp or lobster. So I grew up with very little palate for animals because the animals that we ate as Jews, there weren't that many choices, right? And so I never developed those tastes. But it just seems like people have a hard time, like you say, even if don't have a faith, giving up those tastes.
Yes, exactly. Very hard to give up those tastes. And the truth is that kosher does not mean you must eat any of these animal products. It means under very strict certain guidelines, you can. And I argue that given factory farming today and the reality of how much we know and the alternatives, that kosher means pathway to veganism. Undeniably, that it was moving us towards a more ethical diet. And just because centuries ago and decades ago, what we had access to and what we knew meant a limited amount of animal product consumption does not mean that still applies today. It's clear that kosher means a pathway towards veganism, ultimately, back to the Garden of Eden as we once knew it.
Right. Because just because an animal is slaughtered under kosher law, that doesn't mean the animal doesn't suffer.
Exactly. Because even though the slaughtering process may be slightly more humane than a non-kosher process, the whole process from birth until that moment is still horrific, even in the kosher process. And we have to own that. That it's there is no freedom. The amount of suffering is immense. And so we can no longer say, and this is hard for me to say as a traditional Jew and as a rabbi, that we can no longer say that kosher meat is more ethical. I mean, the whole idea of it's an oxymoron, meat and ethical in my personal view. And so thankfully, there is another path that is deeply Jewish.
And kosher doesn't even necessarily mean healthy. I remember once when I lived in LA, I was doing a cooking demonstration at a Chabad house, and I had to shop at a particular store that was kosher.
Right.
And the thing is, there's a lot of stuff in that store that I would identify as crappy food, but it was kosher.
Right. So one of the ways that kosher helps with veganism on this front is that a vegan establishment doesn't always know, some of them are very strict, but they don't always know the origins of the food products they buy from factories. There could be a percentage of it that actually is animal product based, whereas a kosher establishment is very clear on all the origins because of the stringencies involved, that you're not eating bugs, you're not eating something that had a red dye that came from other animals. And so there is actually value to the stringencies of the kosher establishment to make sure that not only is it something not explicitly an animal product, but even the origins on a factory level are not. And this is something that's pretty significant to me, actually.
Yeah. Sharon wanted to know, what are some of your favorite substitutes for traditional foods like deli meats and blintzes? Because, things like bagels, we know, and now we can get non-dairy, kosher cream cheese. But what about, like, there is actually a vegan pastrami now. The lady that invented it's going to be on the show.
Oh, you mean, what's her name in LA? My friend in LA, I'm blanking.
Jenny.
Jenny, yeah, Jenny, of course. Oh yeah, she's great. And I tasted that. She came to our Shamayim. We have an annual Jewish spiritual retreat. And she came to this last one and we all tasted her product. It was really certified kosher in addition to obviously being vegan. And yeah, thankfully, these options are just incredible. And I think this is important because I think there are people who will then choose veganism because they're environmentalists or because they care about animal rights or because they care about their own health. But there's others that will need to know there's no sacrifice in their eating. They're foodies. And so I think that we can't neglect quality of food. And so, I'm a little embarrassed to say that because my wife is such a wonderful chef, Shoshana, that she really manages this stuff. So I can't give very specific recommendations. My cooking ability is not up to par, but I have never felt a sacrifice in my life on this experience. And if you look at our website, we have a number of resources there on the Shamayim website around this.
Nice. So here's a question about how to navigate the Jewish holidays like Passover, where whether you're the host or the guest, there's traditionally a lot of foods that are really unhealthy.
Yes.
How do you navigate it either as the host or the guest?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. And so in my case, we're almost always the host. And so we're fortunate to be able to dictate that. As a guest, it's incredibly difficult because if you're vegan and you're invited just to a Passover Seder, it's unless it's explicitly from a vegan friend, it's very likely to be an alienating experience. Not only to mention the shank bone or the egg on the Seder plate, which by the way, we recommend replacing the shank bone with a beet and the egg with a mushroom. So it's very easy to have a kosher Seder plate with an alternative, but also just the food experience. I am personally willing to be at a meal that has non-vegan options, but I know others are not. And so it's important to make clear to hosts one's diet and make sure they can accommodate that at the least. But also, thankfully, the Jewish vegan world is so rapidly growing that it's not so hard to reach out to one of our Jewish vegan virtual communities and find a Seder option.
Yeah, that's terrific. I don't want to say why are the kosher laws so strict, but to give you an example, this show is sponsored by a wonderful company called California Balsamic Vinegar, and the only ingredient is grapes. And yesterday when they give 2 free samples to every guest, but I'm guessing you're not going to be able to accept them because he can't get them certified kosher because the mother vinegar, which is just grapes, is in Modena, Italy, and there's no rabbi there to do it. So like Sharon says, she's been invited to do some cooking demonstrations, but they won't even let her use kale unless it's certified kosher. But vegetable, how can a vegetable not be kosher?
Totally. It is very hard. It's very hard to understand the intricacies of all these laws. There's something I appreciate, but I can also see how someone would feel that many of these rules have gone too far when it comes to things like fruits and vegetables, which are so obviously God's food, so to speak, right from the earth. There is a concern with the production process and the preparation process in order that things not become contaminated. Just like we wouldn't always trust a meat restaurant to produce our vegan food in a way that's not going to be cooked on the same grill with meat food. I personally don't want my falafel or my mushroom sandwich on the same grill as right next to a meat burger. So too, the kosher process wanted to maintain that integrity of separation. And so it is very complicated, but it was also not only about the product. Part of the goal there was to keep the Jewish people alive. And the belief was historically that Jews should eat among Jews because they were worried about they were worried about violence against Jews. They were worried about assimilation. We live in a new era. I mean, in the 20th century America, not to mention the 21st century, we live in a different era of multiculturalism and of food preparation. And so we need to think more about eco-kashrut, the ethical dimensions of kashrut, not only this legalistic dimension.
Right. Maxine says, thank you for having the rabbi as a guest. Just fabulous. And yes, thank you for being here, Rabbi. So are there any other vegan rabbis in the world, or are you one?
Well, in the Orthodox world, I don't know if I know any. I might know one or two. It's been a number of years since we talked about food, but who are, fully vegan. Thankfully, in the broader world of rabbis, in our Shamayim network, there are many who are vegetarian and vegan friendly. And I don't know if it's a dozen or a few dozen now who are fully vegan, and with full diversity: Reconstructionist movement, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, straight Jews, queer Jews, white Jews, Jews of color. There are rabbis who are getting this. Unfortunately, many feel they have to be very private about it because they feel that that this is something that many people dislike, and they will be cut down and delegitimized if they talk about this. I'm one of the few who has made this very central to my public identity and to my activist work, because I also, as an activist in the social justice world, I say, animals can't be off the issue. We're going to fight racism. We're going to fight for refugees. We're going to fight for Muslim rights. We're going to fight against anti-Semitism, all these various dimensions of fighting for the vulnerable, women's rights. But look, central to this means I don't understand it. How you can be a human rights advocate but not be an animal rights advocate. And so I'm very clear in this. I don't always embrace intersectionality, as it's called, but I'm very clear that this issue has to be on the table, so to speak. And so, but yes, thankfully there are other rabbis, and we have a number of statements we've released where rabbis have kind of signed on to that, have signed on to committing to that.
Thank you. So watching live, we have, I'm so sorry. Terry, what is the rabbi's perspective on why God allowed people to eat animals? Because a lot of people say, well, the Bible says, what does the Torah say? What does the Talmud say? And I always feel that just because God said you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So the Talmud says there's 3 stages to this history, and I would add a 4th. The first stage is Garden of Eden, vegan diet. Then after the flood, there is this experience, the Talmud says, meaning after the Noah's Ark story. Again, we don't have to treat this as historical fact, but the idea of whether somebody here views it as historical fact or not as fact, the idea of the flood story then says, okay, the world was so violent, instead of taking out your violent impulse on humans, take it out on animals. Which sounds strange to us today, but that was the idea. So they said only animals can be killed as a sacrificial offering, very limited cases. You're going to offer the animal to God, right, as an animal sacrifice. Then the third stage was, okay, in addition to the animal sacrifice, now if it's done in a ritual offering, again, not that you should, not that you must, but in this very limited fashion, you can. Now I argue for the 4th stage of that history, which is to say, in our new era of factory farming, in our new era of access to foods, in our new knowledge of animal consciousness, of human health, and all these facets, it is clear that we need to return to the Garden of Eden. We need to once again rebuild that model. And so Judaism is clear that the ideal was the Garden of Eden, and that is what we're striving to return to.
Thank you. Jesse says, I really appreciate Rabbi Shmuley's strength of character to expand his moral consciousness within his religion. So thank you for that. You know, it's interesting, Rabbi Shmuley, being Jewish, my relatives are Jewish. So when I go to their funerals, they serve food, and the food that they serve is the same food that caused the person to die. And the standard American diet, as bad as it is, I sometimes think the standard American Jewish diet is worse, with the schmaltz and, you know, all the things that I ate growing up. I mean, those are terrible for health. Do Jews not, I'm not saying that Jews necessarily all have to be vegan, but do they not understand the ramifications of some of the foods that are their traditional foods that are causing heart disease and death?
Yeah, this is exactly the point. The point is that they don't understand. They don't understand. Yes, there are those who really have read, they really get it, but behavioral change is so hard. We know how hard it is to change bad habits. There are those who get it but can't change. But more and more, it's hard for us to believe, those of us who are immersed in the world of news every day that tells us this, they simply don't know. And so let me tell you about one of our programs. We have a program called the Synagogue Vegan Challenge, which is one of our programs of Shamayim, done in partnership with Veg Fund, which is to make synagogues vegan. It's to make synagogues vegan, and we give grants to these synagogues to offer vegan food and vegan education, because simply a lot of people have no idea. They still think that meat is actually good for them. I need more protein. Meat is what you need. I need more eggs. Dairy is what I was raised on. I mean, they literally have no clue. And so not only is it a religious education, it's also a health education. Let me say one more thing there, Chef AJ, which is, I believe today, more than a political revolution, we need a spiritual revolution. The spiritual revolution will sustain the political revolution. The spiritual revolution is a revolution of empathy, of compassion, of living by a deeper spiritual awareness that all life is interconnected. If this pandemic taught us anything, it's about the interconnectivity of life, that our health is all intertwined. The animal kingdom, the human kingdom, the non-human animals, that we are all interconnected in life and in health. And so we need to make this point more and more, because a lot of people, surprisingly, haven't even heard it.
Right. So growing up, I went to yeshiva. Until I moved to California, I went to Orthodox school. So it was more in Hebrew than it even was in English, which is probably why I'm so bad at math today. I didn't get a lot of math, but I remember the rabbi, well, he was saying that in the Jewish religion, we're not supposed to do anything that harms ourselves or others. So in other words, like, for instance, smoking, for example, that wouldn't be something you would expect a Jew or an Orthodox Jew to do, or having like remember having a tattoo. That was you don't do anything to, like, the body that God gave you is sacred, so you don't harm it. So to me, when you eat unhealthy food, especially if you know it, that doesn't fit in.
That's exactly right. In Hebrew, it's called pikuach nefesh, saving a life, and it is one of the highest of the mitzvot, of the commandments, to do everything it takes to save life and to distance ourselves from things that make us unsafe. Just like it's obvious that Judaism would require us to wear a seatbelt in the car, obvious that we cannot smoke, obvious that we have to exercise as a religious principle. It is totally obvious that as a religious principle, even a commandment, we need to make better diet choices.
Right. Already people are saying, Eileen, please have the rabbi back. I would love to. I understand that people are not going to be vegan, but what drives me crazy as a Jew is when I see Jews that hunt and that wear fur coats. Yes. Because I understand that people think for whatever crazy health reasons they need to eat animals. But I mean, it drove me crazy because coming from an Orthodox background, and then when I moved to California, I was living with people that were Reformed and going to their synagogue. And I'm like seeing people, first of all, you're in California, so you don't need a fur coat. It's never cold enough. Right. But that drives me crazy. Do Jews not know that you're not supposed to kill animals just for fun?
Totally. Thankfully, most Jews do actually get that one. But it is so clear in the sources. It is so clear in the Jewish sources that hunting is and even centuries ago, that it's a prohibited activity. But one of the ways you're of a particular faith or cultural community is if you're more embarrassed when someone of your people of origin so to speak, do that wrong thing. And so I'm more embarrassed when I see a Jew do these things than a Gentile. That's one of the ways I know I'm a Jew. When I see someone, someone who identifies as a Jew who's hunting or wearing a fur coat, as you said. Going back to the Noah story and the flood, the Hasidic masters gave an interesting teaching. They said there's two ways to stay warm when it's cold out. One way is to put on a fur coat. The other is to light a fire. The idea of the fur coat is to just keep yourself selfishly warm. The other is to light a fire that keeps yourself warm and others warm. That's the way we have to think of self-interest today. He's called a tzaddik im peltz. He's called a righteous person with a fur coat on, which is to say not righteous at all, of course. That we have to figure out how we're going to nourish ourselves, keep ourselves warm by keeping each other warm as well. That's our new era of interconnectivity.
That's amazing. Are you familiar with the website askmoses.com?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
I love that because, you don't always, it's so cool. It's like 24-hour access to like an amazing rabbi and you can get your questions answered. I don't know how they do it, but I've used it a few times when I've had, just problems with things in life and people. And I really, really respect and appreciate, the work you do, just being a rabbi, because it's just, thank you.
Okay, but just one caveat there. With all respect to my friends in the Chabad world and the Ask Moses world, just listeners shouldn't ask vegan questions there. Chabad is notoriously very, very pro-meat. There are some exceptions I actually know one Chabad that does really embrace veganism. They were part of our synagogue vegan challenge, if I recall correctly. I know for sure they were in Canada. So there is one Chabad house that has embraced this. But in general, Jewish questions might be great there, but you're not going to get.
Oh, trust me, it wasn't a vegan question.
Yes,
it was more
exactly.
is about like people do. Yeah. So, I always kind of liked I didn't really like Yom Kippur, I'll be honest, because as a kid, it was kind of boring. But what I liked about Yom Kippur is the rabbi didn't wear leather that day.
Yes,
so
yes, exactly.
Why not just not wear leather every day, rabbis?
Yes, I love it. I love it. The Shlah HaKadosh, the Shlah HaKadosh, who was a Hasidic rabbi, explained actually that we don't wear leather shoes on Yom Kippur, not because it's less comfortable, they would say, but because Yom Kippur represents our highest angelic self of what we can be, of what we rethink our food choices, we rethink our relationship to sexuality. And so too, he says, there's no way we can beg God for compassion when we ourselves are not acting compassionately, wearing animals on our feet. We're begging for our lives and our prayers, and then we're gonna have death on our feet. No, unacceptable. We cannot wear death on our bodies. We need to remove ourselves from that. I'm wearing a leather belt right now, non-leather belt right now, not, fake leather shoes, so to speak. And thankfully we have these options. And that's a religious act. Friends, we don't just have to do traditional Jewish acts to be doing Jewish acts. When we're doing anything promoting compassion, that is itself a mitzvah.
So Sharon says stremels are made of fur, so sad. I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, a stremel is a Hasidic hat made of fur. Why did they wear it back in Poland? Because it was very cold. So it makes no sense why someone in 100 degrees in Jerusalem or New York is wearing a stremel as they're on their way to shul, they're on their way to synagogue, and they're wearing a fur hat walking around. Their ancestors did it because it was cold, and that's the kind of hat you could get. So they made that garment into a religious object. You can get fake stremels. You can get fake fur to make those kind of things. And I was a part of the ban fur movement in New York and in California and other places, even though the Hasidic world was very opposed to our activism. Look, it is not a religious sacrifice to make that transition. So we should be against stremels, I think.
I just love you. You're just like to be what you're doing. And it can't be easy to go up against, like you say, tradition,
It is not easy. So I led the boycott against the agri-processors, the Rabushkin's meat factory, after the second largest immigration raid that happened May 11th, 2008, was this raid in Postville, Iowa. And I led that international boycott. And boy, was I vilified for that. Across the board, they said only anti-Semites have protested kosher factories. How could you do that? And as an Orthodox rabbi, you're not a rabbi, you're not a Jew. You're a fake Jew. I said, look, no, I'm defending the Jewish tradition, that we cannot allow ourselves to be involved with these corrupt injustices, and we have to call it out. Temple Grandin said, and she does the animal welfare world, not the animal rights world, but she said this was the worst she had seen, the worst treatment of animals she had seen. And what a shunda, what a shame for the Jewish world to be supporting that. And so we need to move away from that. And sometimes, unfortunately, Jews should support Jews, but sometimes Jews have to also push back against Jews publicly against these things.
Nice. Judy wants to know where your congregation is located.
So I do not have a congregation. I lead a learning center in Scottsdale, Arizona called Valley Beit Midrash, which is a pluralistic, non-denominational learning center where we engage in social justice activism, we engage in Jewish learning. But even beyond that, Shamayim, our Jewish vegan movement, is national and beyond. And what the best ways to tap into that, if you know a college student, we give stipends to Jewish college students to create change on campus, to make their campuses go vegans, help their campus go vegan. As I mentioned, we have our synagogue vegan challenge to have synagogues go vegan. And we have our annual retreat, which we have in Baltimore and we have in LA. We rotate cities, East Coast to West Coast. Anyone is welcome, not just Jews. Anyone is welcome to join this. Where we come together for celebration, for education, for learning, for activism, so we can create change together. So I'm technically based in Arizona, but in typical times I travel quite a bit. So I'd be happy to come to your community, and I probably will be coming to your community, but right now I'm not flying so much.
Nice. Tracy's saying a spiritual revolution of compassion. I love this so much. Daryl is saying this is a good message. Tracy says the rabbi's message is wonderful and much needed. Tracy says, I can tell this is a talk I will come back to time and time again for motivation. Thank you for having the rabbi on your show. Edie says, this is so great. So I just didn't know if you could see the comments, so I wanted to read them. So Dina says in the series Orthodox, which is very popular, that the wardrobe people used fake fur in the movie. That's fantastic.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's very interesting. Thank you.
That's great. Oh, do you? The question is, do you have a website? And if so, I'll type it in the chat box.
Okay, yes. So if people just type in Shamayim vegan, they'll find it, but it's really shamayim.us. So
I'll type it in.
So SHAMAYIM.us. Again, Shamayim means the heavenly realm, which we're seeking to build here on earth.
Great. So I almost don't even want you to say what this is because it's so I get so triggered by animal abuse. But Sharon says, how do we get to stop the kapros and the barbaric practice of it?
Okay. So kaparos or kaparot is a practice that some Sephardic Jews or Orthodox Jews do leading up to Yom Kippur, where they swing a chicken over their head and then kill the chicken, basically a scapegoat idea. They're going to pass their own sins on from themselves onto the animal. I have argued, and thankfully it doesn't have to be me arguing, the sources throughout Jewish history have argued that this is forbidden. This is like a pagan activity that has no place in Jewish thought. This idea of scapegoating, of killing the animals, and sometimes there's deception that these animals are being given to the poor. In fact, it's not true. The footage has shown that these animals are being dumped in mass, and there are cases where they might go to the poor, these chickens, to be eaten. But more often, these chickens are being dumped in mass. It's incredibly non-hygiene mentality, and it embraces some magical non-religious idea that we don't have to change ourselves morally and religiously. I'm going to pass my sins on to the chicken. So there are always protests by animal rights activists outside these kaparas things. Thankfully, the practice is slowly, we're winning big time. The practice is dying out. I've created a petition of dozens and dozens of Orthodox rabbis who are publicly willing to say they oppose the practice. And it's something that is going to be eradicated in a matter of time.
Well, that's good because it's like that's a place to start. Maybe they're not going to go full on vegan, but you inch them in a little bit at a time.
I really do believe in that. I really do believe in the baby step approach. Someone like me went vegan overnight. I got it and I made the change, but other people are really going to take baby steps. And I think we have to hold people's hands in whatever steps they're going to take.
That's great. So tell us about the egg-free challah program.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So egg-free challah, we forget. Some people say, oh, I'm a vegetarian. I get it. I'm a vegetarian. Kol hakavod. I mean, great job. It's great to be a vegetarian. But the truth is the exploitation is no less when it comes to dairy, in fact, it's the worst when it comes to chickens by quantity, in terms of quantity. And so we have to get away from eggs. Challah does not need eggs. challah, the beautiful bread we eat on Shabbat. My wife's challah is the best challah in the world. If you go to Got Kosher in LA, this is vegan challah that we're talking about over there. And so you will sacrifice nothing. There are great vegan recipes for water challah. You don't even need egg replacer, inside these challahs. They taste amazing. It's the best challah in the world. And so I encourage folks to think about that. And so we have an egg-free challah campaign where we want synagogues to sign on. They're only going to serve challah that's going to be vegan friendly.
That is so amazing. So I get why you wanted to be a vegan. Why'd you want to be a rabbi?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, it's interesting. When I made that decision, it was a very complex decision about what I wanted to do in my life. I was raised to be in the corporate world. My father was, is an entrepreneur, and that didn't fit for what I wanted to do. I believed that, as I said, we need a spiritual revolution. That yes, there's political change that's needed here and there. Yes, there are all kinds of ways to create change. But I think that change happens more deeply from persuasion than legislation. I'm for legislative change. But I think that when we live by a deeper empathy, a higher spiritual consciousness, we can change the world. And I looked at the Jewish sources and I saw they were about what we call tikkun olam, repairing the world. That Judaism has a rich tradition of being on the front lines to advocate for the vulnerable. And I said, you know what? I'm inspired by that vision. I'm inspired by a vision that sees ritual not as an end in itself, but ritual as a vehicle towards self-transformation, family transformation, community transformation, and global transformation, in order that that we can create a more compassionate world. And I think that communities have broken down. People are more and more doing things alone, all the more so in a pandemic. But religion continues to be successful at maintaining community. And I want to tap into that energy to use that for good.
Nice. Well, Ellen says your authenticity cannot be contained and that you are very genuine. And I couldn't agree more.
That's very kind.
So yeah, I became vegan when I was 17. That was 43 years ago.
Yeah.
But even if I hadn't, I think I would have, because I had read a book by Dr. Richard Schwartz called Judaism and Vegetarianism, which made the case that not everybody has to be vegetarian or vegan, right, but if you're Jewish, you should.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if there's anything that you know of either in the Torah or the Talmud that could argue that case, because people that use the Bible say, well, we're supposed to eat meat. It says here in the Bible. What does it say in Jewish law to favor not eating animals?
Yes. Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So by the way, on that topic, I've written a number of books, but the one most explicitly on the topic, called The Jewish Vegan, is a resource among others that could be helpful. And Richard Schwartz's book was also helpful to me. And he's a dear friend. I assume he's still living in Israel. He was last time we talked, and has done so much. Really, some people might say he was the grandfather of the modern Jewish vegetarian movement. And so Jewish law is very clear here. It's very clear that that not only of the do no harm process, but that we are morally complicit in being a part of systems that create harm. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that we should love another like ourselves, and that the Jewish law that emerges out of the kosher system, but even more out of the Musar tradition, out of the community, out of the character development movement around rachamim, cultivating compassion, and that it says in the Midrash, in the rabbinic sources, that all of the rituals, all of the mitzvahs, all of the mitzvot are ultimately about the refinement of character. So this is not only about the consequence of reducing suffering, it's also about the refinement of our personal character. That is the goal of the mitzvot at large. So you can't point to a law specifically that necessarily says this, aside from things like do not kill, which I believe has to be extended today to all of life. But it's the meta system. It's the meta reason for the whole system. Let me say one more thing about this. Maimonides, arguably the greatest Jewish philosopher and legalist in the Jewish tradition, says the whole purpose of the mitzvot, the whole purpose of all of these practices, eating matzah, going to synagogue, kosher, Shabbat, all of these things ultimately is about creating a more just inner world and a more just outer world. That we ourselves should live more compassionately, and we should create a more just society. That's the purpose of the whole thing Maimonides says.
That's beautiful. Leah says, would you please consider running for president?
Well, I won't say anything about our political moment right now.
Yeah.
But there is a desperate need for leadership, and we need a leadership in this country that ultimately brings us together rather than divides us. We need leadership that is going to inspire us to come together, inspire us to sacrifice little bits in order to help one another, going to inspire us towards public health, inspire us to live with empathy, inspire us to learn, to read books, to read about how we can live more compassionately. And thankfully, that leadership does not only have to be political. That's my whole point. One of my whole points today. That leadership can be religious. It can be political. It can operate in the corporate world. It can operate in the public health world. We need leadership on every level. Each of us in the grassroots way can participate in this.
Do you think we'll ever have a Jewish president?
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. I mean, just looking at the candidates we had in this last, whether people like these candidates or not, from the Democratic primary, you had Bernie Sanders, love him or hate him. You had Marianne Williamson, who was a spiritualist. There was another candidate, I'm blanking on his name. There were at least 3 contenders in the Democratic primary. And then in the Republican world also, there have been various, insiders, who have been, also the Starbucks guy, the Starbucks guy, Howard is also a Jew. So there's no doubt. I mean, anti-Semitism is alive and well. Jews have always been scapegoated as the cause of all problems, the killers of Christ, the founders of capitalism, if you hated capitalism, the founder of socialism, if you hated socialism. Today, if you hate nation states, all of a sudden Jews have the worst nation state in the world. Not to say there's not problems in Israeli policy, but all of a sudden people who don't attack other countries, but go after the Jewish state. So anti-Semitism is alive and well, but Jews are the quintessential in America insider and outsider. Jews are on the inside of the establishment today, but also the outsider, because we're pushed to have a spiritual consciousness with the marginalized. And so that puts us at a unique position, both to create change on the inside of establishments and to be aligned with those who are most marginalized.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. So I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this. You can't ask it to a lady, but Dina says, how old is he? He looks super young.
Well, thank you for asking that. Last week I turned 39. So I am at the end of my 30s. And if I have any youth in me, I will credit it not to anything other than the vegan diet.
Nice, beautiful.
But please.
You mentioned you raised your children vegan. Did they like it?
Oh, they love it. They're advocates already in their schools. We're blessed with a 7-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old son, a 3-year-old daughter, and a 1-year-old son. And we're foster parents, so kids pass in and out of the house. The foster kids don't love it so much because they were fed beef. They're very beef dependent, and so they get a lot of diarrhea their first few weeks when we transition them, but then they thrive. Actually, the foster kids we've got were malnourished. They were malnourished and neglected in their food, and they're oftentimes in the bottom 5 percentile of their weight. And after just a month or a few months with us, thank God they're thriving. Their health is thriving, and they're back sometimes in the top 10 percentile of their weight. And our biological kids love it. I mean, we believe in nursing, and so they do very well on breast milk. But even once they're past that stage, they have always thrived in their vegan diet. And as I said, they're advocates already in school for this.
Isn't it interesting that Israel is one of the most vegan-friendly countries there is?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Now, there's something positive and challenging to say there. The challenging part is the non-vegan Israeli world is still very meat-based. And so there's a lot of work still to be done there. But you're exactly right. Per capita, there are more vegans in Israel than any other country in the world. And that's very inspiring to me. You go to Tel Aviv, you can't have your eyes open and not trip on a vegan restaurant. I mean, it's unbelievable. Every restaurant you go to is either vegan or has a vegan stamp next to the vegan options. And this is so ingrained in the Israeli culture. It's one of the reasons one of the many reasons I just love going there. And Israelis are very health-based. That, very hiking based and outdoors based, and very it's very much a foodie culture.
That's great. Amy wants to know when you're going to be in Baltimore.
Baltimore. We have a scheduled Shamayim Jewish vegan retreat in Baltimore. It's up on our website. It is currently planned for the spring of 2021. Now we will have to revisit. I think it's March. We will have to revisit, public health and safety and whether it makes sense to keep that date. But we're currently planning on it. And so there was another date. I'm actually teaching in Baltimore at a synagogue as well. That is planned for spring of 2021, a separate date. So hopefully I will see folks out there in the coming year.
Yeah. I think that the fact that I was raised kosher made it so much easier to be vegan later on, because I understood this idea of black and white, like I eat this, I don't, it wasn't hard. It's the same, like, for example, just like when you're kosher, you just don't eat certain things. And when you're vegan, you don't eat certain things. It's like non-negotiable. And I think being raised Orthodox and kosher made veganism, it's like I already knew, like, you don't have this in your house. You don't eat this. It's not food.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. And one of the challenges with my kids, they recently heard this idea of having a meat kitchen and a milk kitchen, this separation, and they didn't even know what I was talking about. I mean, these are traditional Jewish kids, but they're in a vegan house. There's no separation of meat and milk. I mean, there's neither one. Everything is called paruv. It's paruv. It's neither meat nor milk, and so it should be what we call paruv, a paruv world. By the way, if folks here are affiliated with Jewish communities, urge your synagogue to, I'm happy to give talks to synagogue communities. We really do need this message to come from rabbis, because Jews need to hear this message based within Jewish sources and Jewish tradition.
Absolutely. You remind me of my childhood. We had milchiks dishes, fleischiks dishes, and you're gonna don't judge me on this, but we had treif dishes too.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I think you were not an anomaly. I think there were people doing that, and I understand that. Just for people who don't know what treif means, it means, it basically means non-kosher. I mean, it means more than that, but the non-kosher dishes, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my parents were a little bit hypocritical, but they wanted to have a kosher home.
No, there's an integrity to that. There's an integrity to that, because they wanted their kosher dishes to be kosher, and so they wanted to maintain that. Yeah,
that's neat. How can we support you in your work?
Okay, that's very kind. Thank you for asking that. There's so many ways. The first one is always be your authentic self. Go create change. I mean, all of us doing that in our own way matters. If you are if you're not Jewish and you're listening, we always want to strengthen the interfaith work here. Let's figure out ways to do that. All these different interfaith vegan films that just came out recently, I was privileged to be in those films, and those things are important. Those things are important to build those interfaith. If you are a Jew, get your synagogue to join our Synagogue Vegan Challenge. If you have a kid, if you know a college student, get them to be a part of our campus program. If you want to join one of our spiritual retreats, please do that. Follow our Facebook page on Shamayim. There are, I hate to say it because I don't want to be a fundraiser on your program. We always need financial support. We have a 3-person staff that can grow much bigger. But, also help us get this message out, get the Jewish vegan out to people so people can read about that. We want people to tap into this, and there are ways to do it. And here's the other thing. We take a positive approach. We don't yell at people. We don't yell at people. We don't shame people. I get why some people would do that. We try to take an uplifting message. This is about human flourishing. This isn't about shaming people. We should flourish, and humans can flourish in a more compassionate model. And this is authentically Jewish. We promote Judaism. People should engage in Judaism in a pluralistic framework, but they should do this in a way that is upgraded to a 21st century Judaism, which is more in touch with the current reality.
What I was thinking is, obviously not everybody's Jewish, but yes, many people have different faiths. What if there was like some kind of organization where the leaders of those faiths, whether it's a pastor, a minister, or a reverend, that were vegan? Have you guys ever thought about getting together, forming a coalition, so that because I do believe that if the head of the organization has standards like you do, it makes it easier. Like, because I've seen ministers at churches, they've gone vegan for health reasons, and they've inspired their congregations to do the same. Have you ever thought about getting together with all leaders of different faiths?
Thank you so much. Yeah, Chef AJ, first of all, these have been such awesome questions. So thank you so much. And I just love your energy and your positivity. And, and I want to give a nod to the folks folks, it's very common today, I'm spiritual but not religious. And I want to give a nod and respect to that. Religiosity might not be for everyone. Spirituality can be for everyone. And if that's you, I just want to say, you can be Jewish too. There is a disproportionate number of Jewish atheists, Jewish spiritualists who don't want to be a part of the religious community. That's great. I don't want to reject that. But those who want religion, which I understand is more structural spirituality, sustained spirituality within a community that has kind of a deeper roots, there are Jewish ways to tap in where you can be vegan and tap into this. And you're exactly right, Chef AJ, that I recently researched this. There is virtually no robust interfaith vegan movement. And I tried to launch it a few years ago and I just didn't have the funding to do it. I reached out to a very small Muslim community, a very large Christian community of vegans, an emerging but a large Eastern tradition. And I tried to launch it. I had phone conversations with a few dozen clergy people because I said, we are overdue. We need our individual faiths, particularism matters, but we need the universalism and to strengthen each other. And they were on board to do it. And I didn't have the time to, and I'm not a fundraiser, so I didn't go out there trying to raise the money, but that was the only issue. But it's unbelievable. There is no robust interfaith community that's making this happen.
I think that would be just amazing. And I'm reaching out to the community saying, could somebody please here start one? Because I'm busy right now. So but I would definitely support it. So if somebody didn't want to maybe donate money directly to your organization, could they make Amazon Prime? Could they make your charity their Amazon Prime?
Oh, we've never done that, but I can't see why not. Yeah, that would be.
Because I would be happy right now. It's Animal Samaritans, but I would be happy to do that because most people do shop on Amazon. And I think as long as you're a nonprofit, you can be, it's called Amazon Smile. And then.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. That would be very kind. In addition, and in terms of in-kind donations, if there's any people here who work in the food industry, to the extent that you have products that we can distribute to the Jewish community, the Synagogue Vegan Challenge program, or to those who are a part of our leadership programs, we are happy to distribute new food products to promote those companies and to show people that they can get these tasty options. So, there's those, and as always, to raise the profile of this work, to help us, get out the word that there is a robust Jewish vegan movement that's growing.
It's once I have an idea, it's like, now I got to run with it because now I'm thinking, Seventh-day Adventists, largely vegetarian and vegan, universal Unitarianism, they have that ethical eating part, and many of them are vegan. Self-Realization Fellowship. There's so many faiths already that have this. I mean, so I'm asking my friend Sharon McRae, who was looking for something to do meaningful with her life, to actually start the Vegan Interfaith Council.
Awesome.
So,
by the way, this is such a deep passion for me. I've never been on staff. I've never been paid for any of this work. I've always been on the board level as a founder and kind of cultivator of the movement. And my goal is just to get more staff who can train leaders, who can educate, get that word out there. And the interfaith bit is important, but I almost want to call it metafaith, because it's to say that we don't need to dismiss our unique faith traditions. We should keep those robust for those who want to be a part of those. And yet the collaboration is so powerful to have for example, there should be a interfaith roundtable where people are brainstorming and collaborating, and what we call in the organizing movement, building power. We can build power to create change so that we can approach corporations and say, hey, you're not doing enough to go vegan. We can approach legislators with a power. We need a power of that movement. To go up against big ag, we need a power. And the faith community has so much power if we leverage it properly.
That's amazing. Your path, I do this. This is, I've done over 150 episodes, and I could feel you coming through me at the screen, how
it's
passionate
at my
you
core.
are.
This is just, thank you. This is just at my core. There's plenty of issues I can talk about that feel morally important, but this is so central to me because it feels to me like this is the issue that's going to determine who we are as humans, who we are as Americans, who we are as Jews, who we are as global citizens. What are we about? And this is the future of sustainability of the planet, the future of sustainability of the human enterprise. And so I think we have to get this right. There's no other option. But it's not just that. It's not just moral, it's spiritual. This is so spiritually nourishing for me to think about how we elevate life and be elevated in the process.
So here's a fun question from Linda. Are atheists allowed to join the Interfaith Council?
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? We love you. We want you here. Because look, look, I'm someone who believes deeply in divinity, but Judaism takes a skeptical approach in theology. Judaism says, we don't know what's out there. We don't know what's out there. We should be humble. Some religious people today think religion's about certainty of theology. The more you know who God is, the more religious you are. I think it's the opposite. You're more religious, the more humble you are in what you know. And so I think we should, there's a place for being agnostic, saying there's a higher power. I don't know what that is. And for those who have come to conclusion that there is no God, which is not my conclusion, there is such a large Jewish atheist contingency. And the reason for that is that Judaism is about this world, not the next world. That's not to say that there's not heaven in Jewish theology, but that we call this movement Shamayim because our goal is not to think about heaven in the next world. The goal is to make this world heavenly, to make this world a utopia that we're striving for. And so please, atheists, yes, it'll sometimes be alienating when we use God language, but this is an ethical movement. That's the most central bit. Monotheism is a big part of Judaism, but the biggest part is ethics.
It's funny because you make me think about like what being Jewish means to me, because I've kind of wandered. I mean, it's not like I'm Catholic or anything. Not that there's anything wrong with being Catholic, but I'm not really, like the way I was raised, I'm not really connected to the Jewish community. And then I'm starting to think about how it was when I was. And what I think about Judaism, at least for me, it was a faith of inclusivity and compassion. Like I remember, like we would have people that weren't even Jewish at the Seders or at the high holidays, because if they were hungry,
yeah,
they needed. I'm sorry, okay. It's only the second time.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm very moved. It's only the second time I've cried at my show. Once was a lady with cancer, but I just feel like that. Yeah. It's a faith of inclusivity and compassion. And that's how I was raised, that if somebody is hungry, they need to be fed. If somebody is hurting, you need to help them. And the animals are hurting. And if not, it's like, if not us, who, if not now, when,
Exactly. Chef AJ, I'm so inspired by you. I'm so inspired by you. And I actually think people think of Jewish work as like synagogue work. I think you're doing the most Jewish work. You are upholding the tradition by doing this. And I think that one of the things that's happened is that we should feel empowered to own our Judaism. And I think this is true for people of other faiths as well. Sometimes we allow other people to hijack our faith. We have one alienating experience or two or three or more, and we leave it. We leave the Judaism because we think someone else owns it. Those people own it. I can't be involved with that because they've alienated me. But in fact, we should be empowered to re-own it. And I feel like Chef AJ, you are a Jewish model in the community. I mean, you're beyond that as well. But I look to you as a Jewish role model. For the work you're doing is something that is so rooted in what we're about and what you just said, how we take care of the hungry. And we should say something about human hunger. People might have seen the study a few days ago that emerged that said our lakes are evaporating because a quarter of the water in America is going to cows that are being produced in mass for factory farming. We are evaporating this water. And so that water, and we are drying up the resources in countries in the global south. We are contributing to global hunger. When we care for the hungry, that's not just soup kitchens. That is the vegan diet. So Chef AJ, I'm so inspired by that. And that is the Jewish message at the end of the day.
Yeah, this is beautiful. Well, just to end on maybe an uplifting note, when we mentioned about the atheists are welcome into this Interfaith Vegan Council that Sharon McRae is going to be founding. What do you call an atheist in a coffin?
Is that a joke?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Somebody who's all dressed up with no place to go.
Yeah, that's great. That is great. It reminds me the joke we've all heard a million times that actually atheists and vegans are lumped together. How do you know if someone's atheist or vegan? Don't worry, they've already told you.
They'll tell you.
But yeah. That's actually true. Atheists are proud of it, and vegans are proud of it. And I just want to make that clear. We should be morally firm on who we are, but theologically we should be humble. So I don't want anyone who's ever atheist, God forbid, to feel alienated from their Judaism. Judaism is a system of ethics. It is a culture. It is a vegan movement. Yes, there is a theological component there, but I argue it is not the most central component.
Okay, I got one more joke because I'm trying to
good.
lighten up my. I don't want to
it.
keep crying.
You're awesome. You're awesome.
What do you call an agnostic, dyslexic, insomniac?
Ooh, no idea.
An agnostic, dyslexic, insomniac is somebody who stays up all night wondering if there's a dog.
That's great. I love that.
And you can use them in your sermons.
I will use that. I will use that.
Before the sheltering began, I was able to see one last show, and it was called Old Jews Telling Jokes. And it was the funniest show I had ever seen.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I would love to talk to you forever and ever. I want to respect your time. I hope you can get Dr. Richard Schwartz to come on the show, though, because I think he would be amazing.
Oh, I'm sure he would do it in a minute. I'm sure he would love to. He would. Reach out to me after. I'd be happy to.
Absolutely.
Be happy to
well, I'm just so thrilled that so many people really loved this talk with you, and I thank you so much for your work. And please look into the AJ. Amazon Smile.
Yes, Chef AJ, I just give you the bracha. I hope you'll give it back to me. The blessing that you should continue with good health and long life, and continue your educational work, and continue lifting up the Jewish community, all humanity, and all non-human animals, and all of us, so that we continue to be inspired by you and the great work you're doing. It's an honor to be connected to you and your work.
Right back at you, Rabbi. And thank all of you guys so much for watching. And let's see who we have on the show tomorrow. Oh, we have a chef demo tomorrow making chickpea curried salad. We have the Mama Says Chef Caroline. Amazing. Thanks again, Rabbi Shmuley, and bless you for all the work you do.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
Amen.
Bye-bye.